My mother used to say that people carrying the heaviest pain always smiled the easiest. Funny how one sentence can change your life. Funny how words you don't even remember saying can stop time for someone else. But I didn't know that yet. That night, all I knew was that my coffee had gone cold almost 20 minutes earlier. My feet felt like they had tiny knives buried in them, and I still had 3 more hours left in my shift. The rain tapped softly against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Bellamy's Steakhouse, streaking the glass with silver lines that blurred the city lights outside. Manhattan looked beautiful in the rain if you were inside looking out. If you were outside standing at a bus stop in shoes with worn-out soles, it looked a lot less magical. I tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear and balanced 2 plates against my arm while weaving between tables. Friday nights were always brutal. Expensive watches. Expensive laughter. Expensive people discussing expensive problems while I smiled and asked if anyone wanted another sparkling water refill. 25 years old, working 2 jobs, sharing a tiny apartment in Queens with a roommate who still owed me 3 months of rent. Life wasn't exactly following the vision board I'd made in high school. Not that I had time to think about that. Table 14 needed extra napkins. Table 6 complained that their ribeye wasn't hot enough. Table 9 wanted dessert menus and somehow also wanted me to explain every single item on it, while pretending they hadn't already looked at the menu for 30 minutes. I moved on autopilot. Smile. Walk. Apologize. Smile again. Repeat. The scent of coffee and grilled steak hung in the air while soft jazz drifted through hidden speakers above us. Around me, glasses clinked and conversations blended together into background noise. Rich people always sounded strangely similar when you served them long enough. Different faces. Same voices. Same confidence. Same certainty that the world would continue arranging itself around them. I had just set down a tray near the service station when Mia, another waitress, suddenly grabbed my arm. Olivia. Her eyes widened slightly. Don't look right away. I looked immediately. Of course I did. Who? I whispered. Mia glanced toward the entrance. Them. The front doors had just opened. Rainy air slipped inside for a second before disappearing beneath warm light and polished marble. Then 4 men walked in wearing dark tailored suits that looked like they belonged in magazines instead of restaurants. They weren't loud. They weren't smiling. But somehow the room shifted anyway. I couldn't explain it. Conversations didn't stop exactly. They just softened. People glanced over without realizing they were doing it. Even I felt it. Like the air pressure had changed. My eyes landed on the man walking in the center. Tall. Dark hair pushed neatly back. Black overcoat resting across broad shoulders. Maybe 34 or 35. Calm eyes that moved across the room without hurry. He wasn't looking for attention, which somehow made everyone notice him even more. I stared a second too long before Mia leaned closer and whispered something that suddenly made my stomach drop. Olivia, she said quietly. I think that's Adrian DeLuca. People hear names differently when fear is attached to them. Some names sound ordinary until they enter a room before the person does. Adrian DeLuca was apparently one of those names. I stared at Mia for a second and laughed quietly because that felt easier than admitting I suddenly had no idea what expression I was supposed to make. You are joking, I whispered. Mia did not laugh back. That was the problem. Mia laughed at everything. She laughed when customers yelled. She laughed when we got orders wrong. She once laughed after slipping on spilled soup and landing flat on her back in front of 20 customers. Mia laughed at life because she said crying took too much energy. But now she just looked at me with wide eyes. I am serious, she said softly. Do not stare. Naturally, I looked again. Adrian DeLuca had already removed his coat and handed it to someone beside him without even turning his head. The movement looked automatic, practiced. He walked through the dining room with the kind of quiet confidence people usually spent years trying to fake. His suit fit perfectly. Dark charcoal. Crisp white shirt underneath. No tie. Simple silver watch. No giant gold chains. No flashy displays of money. Somehow that made him feel more expensive. The host practically appeared out of nowhere and led his group toward the private section near the back windows overlooking the city. I noticed something strange then. Nobody around him seemed relaxed. The men with him looked alert without looking obvious about it. Their eyes moved constantly. Door. Hallway. People. exit signs. It felt less like friends having dinner and more like people carrying invisible responsibilities. Why does everyone look nervous? I asked quietly. Mia blinked at me. Olivia, where have you been living? Under a rock. Probably, honestly. Between work and trying to survive rent prices in New York, I barely had time to know what day of the week it was. Celebrity gossip was not exactly on my schedule. I grabbed the coffee pot from the warming station and frowned. Cold. Again. Of course. Story of my life. I poured myself half a cup anyway and took a quick sip before immediately regretting it. Terrible. Bitter. Room temperature disappointment in liquid form. You look exhausted. I nearly jumped. I turned and found Rachel, our floor manager, standing beside me holding menus against her chest. Table 22 is yours. My stomach dropped instantly. Mine. Rachel nodded. VIP section. I looked toward the back of the restaurant. Adrian DeLuca sat near the windows now. City lights reflected softly against the glass behind him, while rain rolled down outside in silver streaks. One of the men beside him was talking, but Adrian was not paying attention. He was looking out toward the city instead, one hand resting near an untouched glass of coffee sitting beside him. For some reason that felt strange to me, because everyone else around him was eating, talking, moving, and somehow he looked completely separate from all of it. Like his body was sitting at that table but his mind had gone somewhere else entirely. Rachel handed me the menus. Olivia. I looked up. Try not to spill anything. I swallowed hard and stared at the table again. Then Adrian slowly turned his head toward my direction, and somehow from across an entire restaurant, it felt like he had heard every word. Sometimes you can feel people watching you before you actually see them. I used to think that was nonsense. One of those weird instincts people talked about online. But standing there with menus pressed against my chest and a coffee pot in my hand, I suddenly understood exactly what they meant. I could feel it. Not heavy, not uncomfortable, just there. I took a breath and started walking toward table 22. My shoes suddenly felt too loud against the polished floor. Click, click, click. Every step felt ridiculous. I became aware of everything at once. The sound of forks touching plates. The low jazz drifting through the restaurant. Ice shifting inside glasses. The smell of expensive cologne mixing with grilled steak and roasted garlic. And my own heartbeat. Definitely my own heartbeat. I stopped beside the table and smiled automatically. The smile I had practiced for years. Friendly but not fake. Warm but professional. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Bellamy's. My name is Olivia and I will be taking care of you tonight. One of the men smiled politely and nodded. Another barely looked up from his phone. Adrian looked at me for exactly 1 second before returning his attention to the city outside the window. Would anyone like to hear tonight's specials? I asked. One of the men immediately said yes, and I silently thanked him because normal customers asking normal questions felt amazing right now. I started listing menu items while writing drink orders down. Ribeye, filet mignon, sparkling water, whiskey, coffee refill. I blinked. Coffee refill? My eyes shifted toward Adrian's untouched cup. Strange. It looked almost full. Fresh coffee? I asked carefully. Adrian finally looked at me directly. Up close his eyes looked different than I expected. Not cold exactly, just distant. Like someone standing in a room while thinking about somewhere else entirely. He glanced toward the cup beside him and gave a small nod. Please. His voice surprised me. Quiet. Calm. Not deep and dramatic like movie villains. Just steady. I picked up the cup and headed back. Toward the service station. Mia immediately appeared beside me. Are you alive? She whispered. Barely. How is he? I looked down at the cup in my hand. Honestly. I shrugged. He seems normal. Mia stared at me like I had lost my mind. Normal. I filled the fresh coffee and shook my head. I do not know. He just looks. I searched for the word. Tired maybe. Sad maybe. I could not explain it. I grabbed the cup and headed back. When I reached the table again, Adrian was still looking out the window. Rain slid slowly down the glass behind him, turning the city lights into blurry rivers of color. I set the coffee down gently in front of him. Careful, I said softly. It is hot now. Then I smiled without thinking and added, my mother used to say people only drink cold coffee when they are carrying sadness they do not talk about. The words left my mouth before I even thought about them. Just something random. Just something I had heard years ago. But the second I said it, everything changed. Adrian's fingers stopped moving. Completely stopped. The man beside him stopped talking in the middle of a sentence. And for some reason, the entire table suddenly felt very, very quiet. Silence feels different when it is normal. This was not normal silence. This was the kind that made you suddenly aware of your own breathing. The kind where your brain immediately starts replaying the last 10 seconds searching for whatever stupid thing you just did wrong. I looked down at the coffee cup sitting in front of Adrian. Then I looked back up at him. He had not moved. Not even a little. His fingers still rested lightly against the table beside the cup, but they had gone completely still. His eyes were on me now. Not the casual customer kind of looking. Not annoyed. Not confused. Just fixed on me with an expression I could not understand. For a second I honestly wondered if I had somehow offended him. Maybe rich people had weird opinions about coffee jokes. Maybe I had crossed some invisible line that waitresses were not supposed to cross. I opened my mouth quickly. I am sorry, I said softly. That probably sounded strange. Nobody answered. One of the men sitting beside Adrian slowly looked at him, then at me, then back at him again. I suddenly felt like I had walked into the middle of a conversation without realizing it. Adrian blinked once, very slowly. Then his eyes narrowed just slightly. What did you say? He asked quietly. I stared at him. Sorry. Before that, his voice stayed calm, almost too calm. Repeat it. I felt my stomach twist. Mia once told me that powerful people were somehow scarier when they stayed quiet. I never understood what she meant until that exact moment. I swallowed. About the coffee? Adrian did not say anything. He just kept looking at me, waiting. I glanced around the table for help and found absolutely none. The other men looked just as confused as I felt. So I laughed nervously and tried again. I said my mother used to say people only drink cold coffee when they are carrying sadness they do not talk about. Adrian kept staring at me. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. Then something changed in his face. Not much, just enough that I noticed it. His expression softened for a moment before disappearing again so quickly, I almost thought I imagined it. But I had seen it. Something had happened. Something real. His eyes moved away from me and lowered toward the coffee cup sitting in front of him. I watched his jaw tighten slightly. The man beside him finally cleared his throat. Adrian. Adrian did not answer immediately. Outside the windows the rain continued sliding down the glass, turning city lights into moving shadows. Around us forks touched plates again. Conversation slowly returned. Life inside the restaurant started moving once more. But table 22 still felt frozen in time. Then Adrian looked back at me and quietly asked, Who told you that? My smile disappeared, because suddenly I realized something that made my heartbeat stumble. He was not asking because he was curious. He was asking because somehow, he already knew those words. There are moments when your brain notices something before your heart catches up. Tiny things, small things, a look, a pause. A breath that lasts 1 second too long. I stood there holding my order pad while Adrian watched me, and every instinct inside me suddenly started whispering the same thing. Something was wrong. I tried to think, really think, but my mind felt empty. Who told you that? He had asked. Such a simple question. Such a normal question. Except it did not sound normal coming from him. It sounded like he had been searching for something and accidentally found a piece of it sitting in front of him. I shifted my weight slightly and looked at him carefully. Honestly, I said with a small nervous smile, I do not really know. Adrian's expression did not change. You do not know? I shook my head slowly. I heard it a long time ago. I frowned a little while trying to remember. Maybe when I was a kid. His eyes stayed locked on me. From your mother? I felt a strange little ache in my chest at that question. Not sharp, just familiar. I lowered my eyes for a second. No, my voice came out quieter than I expected. My mother passed away when I was little. Silence again. I hated silence tonight. I suddenly missed normal things. Complaints about overcooked steak. Arguments over salad dressing. Literally anything normal. Adrian stared at me for another second before looking away toward the rain outside. I noticed something then. Something tiny. His hand had moved beside the coffee cup, fingers resting lightly against the edge. But they had tightened slightly without him realizing it. Like that answer had done something to him too. The man sitting beside him cleared his throat carefully. Adrian, we should probably discuss tomorrow morning. Adrian ignored him completely. How old were you? He asked quietly. I blinked. What? When your mother died. The question caught me off guard. I stared at him. Customers were not supposed to ask things like that. Not strangers. Not people you had known for less than 2 minutes. But somehow his voice did not sound intrusive. It sounded distant. Like he was asking someone else and I just happened to be standing there. 5, I answered softly. Adrian looked down at the table again. 5 seconds passed. Maybe 10. I could hear silverware clinking somewhere across the room. A burst of laughter near the bar. Rain against glass. Then finally he looked up. Again. His eyes found mine and for the first time all night I saw something there that had not been there before. Not power. Not control. Sadness. Real sadness. Then he leaned back slightly and said 4 words that made my stomach suddenly drop. Stay for a minute, Olivia. He knew my name. And I had never told him. People say your own name sounds different depending on who says it. Most of the time I thought that was ridiculous. A name was a name. 4 syllables in my case. Nothing magical about it. But hearing Adrian say Olivia felt strange for one simple reason. I had never told him what it was. My smile disappeared immediately. I stared at him while my brain started moving way too fast. Maybe he saw my name tag. No. I had taken it off an hour earlier because the pin kept catching on my apron. Maybe Rachel had set it near the table. Maybe Mia had. Maybe I was overthinking everything because I had spent the last 10 minutes feeling like I had accidentally stepped into some weird dream. How do you know my name? I asked before I could stop myself. Adrian looked at me for exactly half a second, then glanced toward my order pad still resting against my hand. I looked down automatically. Right at the top of the order sheet in black marker was my name written beside table assignments. Olivia. Heat rushed into my face instantly. Great. Fantastic. I wanted to disappear into the floor. I actually laughed under my breath and shook my head. Right. I sighed. That was embarrassing. One of the men sitting beside Adrian smiled slightly and looked down at his drink. Adrian did not smile. But I noticed something else. For a second his shoulders relaxed a little. Very slightly. Like some invisible pressure had loosened. Stay for a minute, he repeated quietly. I hesitated. Technically I should not have. Rachel would probably appear out of nowhere and remind me that standing around chatting with customers was not part of my job description. But something kept me there. Curiosity maybe. Or maybe it was the look on Adrian's face. Because he still was not looking at me like a man talking to a waitress. He was looking at me like someone staring at a puzzle piece they had lost years ago. Just for a minute, I said carefully. Adrian looked toward the coffee sitting in front of him. Steam still curled slowly from the top. You said you heard that when you were a child. I nodded. I think so. I frowned a little. Honestly, I cannot really remember. Memory is strange like that. You forget entire years but somehow remember random details nobody else would care about. Smells, songs, certain words. Tiny things that stay for no reason at all. I crossed my arms lightly and thought for a moment. I remember someone saying it while I was sitting on a porch swing. Adrian looked up immediately. A porch swing. I think so. I laughed softly. I do not know why I remember that part. I looked toward the windows trying to pull the memory closer. There were wind chimes too. I frowned harder. Blue ones maybe. Adrian suddenly went completely still again. Not dramatic. Not obvious. Just still. Then beside him one of the men quietly said, Adrian. But Adrian was no longer looking at him. He was staring directly at me with an expression that made my chest tighten because somehow I knew, before he even spoke, that I had just said something I was not supposed to know. Memories are strange things. The harder you try to grab them, the faster they seem to disappear. But sometimes one tiny detail pulls everything else behind it like a thread coming loose from a sweater. I watched Adrian stare at me and suddenly I felt nervous again. Not because he looked angry. He did not. That would have been easier. Anger made sense. This did not. He looked like someone trying to stand perfectly still during an earthquake. One of the men beside him shifted in his seat. "Adrian," he said carefully again. Adrian ignored him completely. His eyes stayed on me. "Blue wind chimes?" he asked quietly. I blinked. "Maybe." I shrugged awkwardly. I was 5 years old. I barely remember last Tuesday. Normally that would have made people laugh. Nobody laughed. Adrian leaned back slightly in his chair and looked away toward the rain outside. His jaw tightened, then loosened, then tightened again. I suddenly had the weird feeling that I should leave. Not because I felt unsafe, just because I felt like I had accidentally opened a door I was not supposed to touch. "I should get back to work," I said softly. "Table 9 is probably wondering if I disappeared." Adrian still said nothing. For a second I thought maybe he had not heard me. Then finally he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out something small. A photograph. The edges looked worn. Not damaged exactly. Just old. Like someone had carried it around for a long time. He stared at it for a second before slowly placing it on the table between us. I looked down. It showed a woman sitting on a porch swing with sunlight across her face. She was smiling at whoever had taken the picture. Her hair moved in the wind and behind her, hanging near the porch roof, were blue glass wind chimes. My breath caught. I froze. Not because I recognized the woman. I did not. But because something inside my chest suddenly felt strange. Like hearing a song you had forgotten existed. Familiar without knowing why. I leaned down a little closer. "Wait." I frowned. "I know this place." Adrian looked up immediately. Every person at the table looked at me now. "You know it?" he asked. I stared at the picture. "I think so." My heart had started beating faster and I did not even understand why. My eyes moved over the porch swing. The blue wind chimes. White railing. Flower pots near the steps. Then suddenly another image flashed through my mind. Tiny hands holding crayons. Lemon cookies sitting on a plate. Soft music playing somewhere inside the house. I looked back up slowly. There was a yellow dog. My voice came out barely above a whisper. Adrian's face lost all color. Completely. His name. I frowned harder, trying to pull the memory closer. Then my eyes widened. Charlie. Nobody at that table moved. Nobody breathed. Because somehow I had just remembered the name of his mother's dog. There are certain moments your mind remembers forever. Because something inside you quietly understands that life has just divided itself into before and after. I did not understand anything anymore. I only knew that the air around table 22 suddenly felt too small. Too still. Looked down at the photograph again, then back at Adrian. Then back at the photograph. Charlie. I knew that name. Somehow I knew it. Not because I had heard it tonight. Not because someone had told me 5 minutes ago. I knew it from somewhere buried deep inside my memory where old things sleep until something wakes them up. Adrian was staring at me now. Completely staring. Not blinking. Not moving. One of the men beside him slowly sat back in his chair and whispered under his breath. "No way." Nobody answered him. I barely heard him anyway. Because suddenly more images were flashing through my mind. Quick little pieces. Like someone turning pages too fast in a photo album. Crayons scattered across the floor. Small hands holding lemonade in plastic cups. Soft wind moving curtains near an open window. A woman's voice laughing somewhere nearby. Warm. Gentle. Familiar. I pressed my fingers lightly against my forehead. Wait. I frowned. I think. I closed my eyes for a second. I think there was a garden too. My heartbeat was getting faster. Sunflowers. I opened my eyes again. There were sunflowers beside the porch. Nobody moved. Adrian looked like he had forgotten how. His eyes had changed completely now. I had seen distant eyes before. I had seen guarded eyes. Exhausted eyes. Sad eyes. But I had never seen eyes looking at me like this. like I had just handed someone air after they had forgotten how to breathe. Olivia. My name sounded different now when he said it. Quieter. Almost careful. I looked at him slowly. Who was she? I asked softly. Adrian looked down at the photograph resting on the table between us. For a long second he said nothing. Rain rolled down the windows behind him while city lights blurred into colors outside. The restaurant noise had faded somewhere far away again. Then finally he picked up the photograph and stared at the smiling woman on the porch swing. My mother. His voice almost broke on the second word. Almost. But I heard it. I definitely heard it. He swallowed once before speaking again. That house belonged to her. He looked back up at me and something inside my chest tightened because I suddenly realized I was not looking at the same man everyone else saw when Adrian DeLuca walked into a room. I was looking at a son. Just a son. A son carrying something heavy for a very long time. Then he looked directly into my eyes and quietly said something that made my entire body go still. Olivia. My mother used to take care of children from shelters every summer. For a few seconds I forgot where I was. Forgot about the restaurant. Forgot about table 9 waiting for dessert menus. Forgot about the rain outside and the coffee sitting untouched between us. All I could hear was Adrian's voice repeating inside my head. My mother used to take care of children from shelters every summer. I stared at him while something slowly unfolded inside my chest. Not a memory exactly. More like a feeling attached to memories that still had not completely returned. Warm sunlight. Safety. A place that felt quiet. A woman laughing softly somewhere nearby. Suddenly I remembered hands. Her hands. I could not see her face clearly yet, but I remembered her hands brushing hair away from my forehead while I sat on porch steps holding crayons. I remembered feeling safe, and I had not felt that feeling in a very long time. No, I whispered before I even realized I was speaking. I shook my head slowly. That cannot be right. Adrian did not say anything. He just watched me carefully. I grew up moving between places after my mother died. I looked down at the photograph again. Foster homes. Temporary houses. I swallowed hard. I was really young. My chest suddenly felt tight. I do not remember much. Adrian lowered his eyes for a second. Then he quietly said, "You do." I looked at him. What? He stared at me with an expression I still could not understand completely. You remembered Charlie. His voice was calm, soft. You remembered the wind chimes. He looked at the photograph in his hand. The sunflowers. I felt tears sting unexpectedly behind my eyes, and immediately looked away because crying in front of customers definitely felt like crossing several professional boundaries at once. I laughed quietly even though nothing was funny. I do not even know why this is happening. My voice sounded smaller than usual. Adrian was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that made my heart stop for half a second. Because some things never really leave us. I looked back at him slowly. Outside the windows the rain had started slowing down. Tiny droplets still slid across the glass, but now I could see pieces of the city lights becoming clearer beyond them. The storm was passing. Somehow I noticed that immediately. Adrian looked down at the photograph one last time before carefully placing it back into his jacket pocket. Then his eyes returned to me. They looked different now. Lighter somehow. Not because sadness was gone. It was still there. I could see it. But now something else sat beside it. Hope maybe. Small. Quiet. But there. Then Adrian looked at me and asked softly, "Olivia." He paused for a second. "Do you remember my mother's voice too?"